This is Tyrese Haliburton, and you're listening to Setting the Pace.
Alrighty, everybody, joining us now on Setting the Pace. He is no stranger to Pacer Nation. It is Pat Boylan. He is your sideline reporter for the radio side of things, and of course, the play-by-play voice of the WNBA, and not just any play-by-play. Voted #1 this year, Pat. I mean, that was great stuff. So, awesome Fever season, of course, and then now the Pacer season going in full swing. How are you doing tonight?
Hey, doing well. Appreciate you having me here. It's been a little while since I've been on with you, Alex. I appreciate the invite and chat Pacers, Fever, whatever you want to talk about here. It's been a pretty remarkable stretch between the two franchises the last year and a half or so. So good to be on talking both here with you.
Yeah, absolutely. And I forgot to say the sideline guys, right? That's the podcast you and Jeremiah Johnson do for Pacers. Is it Pacers.com or where the podcast is at?
Yeah, it's Pacers Digital. That's where you can find us. Yep.
All right, perfect. So you guys know where to find Pat. I mean, he does a great job, of course, but we got a lot to talk about today because the NBA Cup is back, right? And the Pacers have their first game. Now, they were the first team to get an official win in the NBA Cup last season, and so now they get their first game on Friday against the Miami Heat. And this has been a Pacers team that's been kind of up and down for the first 11 games of the season. But Pat, the NBA Cup, do you like the new name, or do you kind of like going back to what the original name was last year, the in-season tournament?
Yeah, I think I like the name. The NBA Cup has a different vibe, a different feel to it, which I think is good. And I think, officially it's the Emirates NBA Cup. So part of the whole reason of all of this was to find a way to bring some intrigue into some of those early season games, especially when you're going up against the NFL and college football, to maybe bring in a more casual audience, but at the same time, ultimately make some money off of it too. And so that comes with a sponsorship. So I'm good with the name. I think it's a little bit of a refresher and an explainer that we have to do that I'm sure you've done. Like, this is the in-season tournament. It's just a new name. In fact, it's almost identical to what it was last year, but I'm good with the name.
Okay, well, that's great. I'm fine with it as well. I still want to refer to it as the in-season tournament because it was called that last year, and I just hate when they have an inaugural thing and then change the name the year after. I wish they would have just been creative enough to come up with the NBA Cup last year, so it would be easier to explain, like you said, but it is what it is. And I will say, I do love the courts. I love how they wear, they're not wearing their City Edition jerseys this year, it looks like, for the NBA Cup. So that was a little bit, I guess I just missed that memo when it came out. But that'll be, I think they're going to wear the yellow jerseys tomorrow. Is that correct?
You know what? I actually don't know that, but I know everything else that you're saying is correct. Yes.
Okay. So the new jerseys that were brought today to the public eye officially, those will not be worn until Sunday. So we'll get to see those Sunday, probably with the old Indy court as well. But they still have that. I saw that at the was it? Did they? I don't think they used it actually for the fan jam. I think they just wore the black jerseys, right? Or was it the court with the white and blue jerseys? I think that's what it was.
I was actually out of town for Fan Jam. I missed
Okay.
it the first time in a long time. So you would know better than I,
Yeah.
but that I believe is coming back.
Yeah, it was the court with the white and blue jerseys, and I thought, what are they doing? This doesn't match at all, but they like that court. So anyway, the important stuff though is the Pacers winning these games, right? Because last year's run in the in-season tournament, the NBA Cup this year, it really kind of spearheaded their, growth, right? And so I think you're going to see more competitive games with this opportunity here. And I think if you look at the group the Pacers got put into, based on paper, it looks like they got a pretty favorable group in terms of how these teams are playing right now. So when you look at this game you coming up against Miami, Jimmy Butler's already been ruled out. How big do you think that these NBA Cup games could be for the Pacers to kind of right the ship a little bit from this 500 basketball they've been playing?
Yeah, I think they could be really important, and you're dead on. They got a favorable draw. I mean, the top two teams in the East have been far and away Cleveland and Boston, at least so far, and those two teams got drawn into the same group. So both of them could make it out, but of course, only one of them is going to advance as the group winner, and it's tough. If you're the wild card, you have to be the very best team that did not win your group. So that'll be, I think, intrigue to watch in that group. And look, from the Pacers' perspective, I think the NBA Cup, and of course, talking last year's in-season tournament, but same thing here, I think it was perfectly built for a team like the Pacers, young, upcoming, looking to prove themselves. Maybe not quite ready to challenge for a championship, although I say that, and the team went to the Eastern Conference Finals last year and probably gave Boston their toughest series, albeit without a win in there. But anybody that watched that series, Indiana could have easily had 3 of those first 4 games. But I think, the one and done type dynamic of if you can get out of group play really suits the underdog well. And so I thought that was big for the Pacers, and the Pacers took it really seriously. Like, I think everybody around the NBA was kind of a feeling out process. How seriously is everybody going to take this? But Rick Carlisle, I found it really interesting around this time last year, kind of sent the message that we're going to take this seriously and we are going to treat it not just as a regular season game, but a regular season game plus. And they competed really hard in those games. They did terrific in group play, went all the way to the championship. So all that to say, the Pacers have shown that they're going to go into the NBA Cup and they're going to view these games as more important. And so I think first and foremost, that's an important way to do well in this tournament, is to take them seriously and be as competitive as they were last time. And look, for a team that I think is dealing with still some consistency challenges, the highs have been really good. The wins over Boston and at Dallas and, just winning going away against the Knicks. All of that, very good. It's funny because they're in 5th place, which if you would have told me through 11 games with the schedule, I would have taken that too. Albeit you wouldn't have guessed they got there at 5 and 6. So maybe this can be the type of thing that is the little jolt that they need. We'll see. It'll be an interesting one because that first game is so important. If you win it, you're in a decent spot. If you lose it, you have to be almost perfect the rest of the way to even have a chance. And even then you need some help. So it's not easy to win a group of 5 when just one advances. It's very different from the World Cup. So it makes that initial game really, really important to get yourself on the right footing.
You said something really interesting there about how this team is in 5th place right now with, the tough schedule they had early on. But you didn't even mention the fact that Andrew Nembhard and Aaron Nesmith have been out for at least about half those games, and they lost both their centers. They're both their backup centers to Miles Turner in the process as well. So it's like they've lost a lot of key players here for some big, tough games. And there's probably 2 or 3 games they wish they could have back that they could have won, and they'd be sitting in a much prettier spot. So I think the Pacers are okay. I know people are kind of losing their minds a little bit with every win and every loss early on in the season, but I think the NBA Cup is always those kind of games are always fun to me because it's a great opportunity for players to kind of raise their game to another level. And we saw the Pacers do that in the NBA Cup last year. We saw them do it in the playoffs as well. And I think, just in my personal opinion, I think these guys are so competitive, especially a guy like Tyrese Haliburton and probably Pascal Siakam too. But I just think for Tyrese, right, they made it to the championship last year and lost. I can see Tyrese being like, I want to get back there and win it this year. I know that sounds a little bit crazy just because it's just an NBA Cup in-season tournament type thing, but it matters to these guys. And I think having those bragging rights is a real thing. And I think that could kind of carry over and be kind of that personality for the rest of the team. Like, oh, we want to win this to prove to everybody how special we are. And, the Lakers won it last year. It didn't really mean anything for their playoff run, but I do think that it did have an impact on the Pacers' playoff run.
Yeah, I think it did too. And look, you go as your star goes, right? The Pacers have multiple stars, but their number one star is Tyrese Haliburton. If he's going to compete at the level that he did last year, then everybody kind of follows suit. And if you think about it, for him, it was that in-season tournament in a lot of way and his general play in November, but the spotlight on that in-season tournament, I think, is what really thrust him into the national spotlight and became more of a household name during that run last year. So it was really big for him specifically. I mean, if you think about that big 3 he hit against Boston, I think it ended up being a 4-point play. He had a couple of huge shots in the game in Vegas against Milwaukee, had the Dame time moment. I mean, those were maybe not playoff moments, and he would go on to have playoff moments. Game 7 against the Knicks, the game winner in Game 3 against Milwaukee. But that was his first kind of rise into the national stardom. I think around this time last year, any basketball fan knew who Tyrese Haliburton was, but maybe not every sports fan. And I think the in-season tournament elevated him in that regard. So I think he experienced that. And look, I think he's motivated enough right now, right? He's not off to the start to the season he wanted. So I don't know if the NBA Cup makes a difference there. I think the motivation's already really high, but sometimes just that little extra energy or little extra motivation can go a long way. And he's been really good at home. So the return home, I think, will be beneficial for him too.
I'm not trying to make a big deal about this because I don't want to do that, but I do like how you're kind of highlighting how these big moments for Tyrese were really important for his growth and recognition nationally. Could that be similar for a guy like Bennedict Mathurin, who is playing the best basketball of his career right now? And I think you can arguably say he's been probably the second best player on this team consistently night in and night out.
I think that makes a lot of sense. We'll see if that is the impact on the floor, but he's a guy that look. Pacers, this is a Pacers podcast. You've got diehards listening. I don't need to explain what happened last season, but of course, not being able to be part of the playoff run, the stretch run was really, really hard on him. I think maybe even a little harder than you might guess. That was his moment to, I think initially maybe his first moment to achieve what you just said and to experience a playoff run. And while everybody else, he was part of the team, of course, don't get me wrong, but while everybody else got to be on the floor and revel in those moments in the Game 6 win over Milwaukee and the Game 7 win in New York, he had to be on the bench for that. And there's no substituting the playoffs, assuming the Pacers are able to get there this year, that and he is healthy. Hopefully those two things occur. The playoffs will be the big fish in this conversation. But right now, I do think if you have an in-season tournament run like you did last year, or at least get to the knockout round if you're able to win the group. And if Mathurin continues to play how he has been lately, I don't know if it'll have quite that same effect because at the time, Tyrese was playing like a top 5 player in the league. Now, I don't want to put any ceiling on Mathurin, but Tyrese was playing at a superstar level. But I think you could see some of the same effect for Bennedict should the Pacers have somewhat of a similar path and should he continue to keep playing well.
Yeah, I mean, it's a great point. I mean, Tyrese was definitely like top 5 at that moment in the league, and it's hard for Mathurin to kind of replicate that. Well, he has been really good for the Pacers this year. I just think that it's going to be hard for him to do. But if you go back to that Lakers championship game, I thought Mathurin looked like the best player out there for the Pacers in that game. I know Anthony Davis was really a tough matchup for the Pacers with their size, and LeBron played pretty well. That defense was just killer for Indiana, and they were not able to hit their shots. But Mathurin didn't really seem phased out there. I think he had 20 points in that game. So, and he was coming off the bench. And so I just think with the new confidence that he's found, like you saw that 38-point career night game for him against the Knicks on Sunday, you kind of wonder, could he kind of use that to kind of like as a step ladder to continue to get better? And I thought last night against Orlando, as we're recording this Thursday night, I felt like there were moments there where he didn't look great, but that fourth quarter, he really turned things on and just put this team on his back when they were struggling to score. So this year for Mathurin has been so encouraging, I think, on so many levels. And I just think that it could continue to, use this opportunity. He could use this opportunity to keep growing. And who knows what that ceiling could be for him this year. But I think he's got to be in the conversation, at least for most improved player of the year.
Yeah, I would think that he certainly would be in a conversation for that. And we started this conversation initially talking about consistency for the Pacers, and that's what they're trying to find right now. The highs have been good, but maybe more valleys than they would like. I think that was kind of the story of Bennedict Mathurin's first 2 years in the NBA. I mean, he had some wow moments. You brought up the in-season tournament championship, but the guy had numerous 30-point games. He had some great nights out there. Battled some challenging nights, has been working with Rick Carlisle, and I think is as hard as I've seen Rick coach anybody in his time here. Dealt with the injuries. So like the highs and the lows for Bennedict Mathurin first 2 seasons, they're all over the place. And look, it's better than not having the highs, right? I mean, that's kind of typical for a young, talented player to experience a lot of that. So as they gain experience, as they get older, can the consistency come? And I think we're still too early in the season to definitively say that, but we're 11 games in, and over his last 7, he's been terrific. So he's strung together 2+ weeks of really, really good play. The next challenges for him will be, instead of talking days and weeks, are we talking weeks and months? But all we have to evaluate is 11 games right now. And for him, he's coming back from the injury a year ago, so it's fair that it took him a couple to get going. And I'll be intrigued to see how this run continues, not just in the NBA Cup game on Friday, but in these next few games. Are we talking about a 10, a 12, a 15-game stretch for Bennedict Mathurin where he's really consistently playing at a high level? And then if so, I think everybody should still be optimistic that Haliburton finds, that superstar all-star form, you start to get a little healthier, all of a sudden it's a glass half full look, but things could start coming together really nicely. And I'm not sure anybody was counting on Mathurin playing like this. So if you can get it and those other things come together too, I think it potentially raises the ceiling on the season. But where we're talking now, the Pacers are 5-6, and they have a lot of work to do to get into a conversation like that.
And that's a fair point. They definitely have a lot of work to do, and Haliburton, I think, is kind of the top of the chain there in terms of you need him to be a little bit more consistent on the offensive end and continue to kind of score more points. And he's had some duds in this early season stretch, but like you said, I wouldn't over worry about it right now. And I still kind of have a half glass full point of view right now, just based on how the season's gone, how the Pacers have stayed afloat. I know you don't like being under 500 11 games in, but you still have a ton of games left to play. So that's what is encouraging to me. And I think Pascal Siakam has been phenomenal to start the season. So the fact that he is shooting the ball so well, Pat, I mean, I just want to talk about him for a second, because that three-point shot, it looks like a lethal weapon out there for the Pacers offense, because he's hitting it at such a high clip. And I know last night against Orlando, there was probably some Pacer fans that wanted to see him get the ball more at the end of the game, but I think he looked a little gassed playing 39 minutes, something that's out of his norm. So as the Pacers kind of balance this short-manned rotation that they have right now because of the injuries, what are realistic expectations for Pascal moving forward, and what have you liked so far about his early season?
Well, I think you might be right about his minutes, and you can tell the Pacers aren't quite right from just a depth perspective when Rick Carlisle made some comments after practice a couple days ago that he's very vigilant on watching the minutes and doesn't want to go into the high 30s, but he had to against Orlando. So that tells you that the Pacers aren't playing with a full deck right now. Look, his three-point shooting has been fantastic. And the hope is he going to continue to do that at the 45-46% clip? That would be amazing. His career averages suggest there might be a little regression to the mean, but if that can be a weapon for him at a higher level than it has been in previous years, then you've really got something, because you're talking about a guy that he's by no means been a poor three-point shooter. It's just not been a weapon for him. A big weapon. He's plenty capable. Don't get me wrong to misunderstand. Just it hasn't been Pascal Siakam, the three-point shooter. He's terrific with his back to the basket, the old school post-up game, the mid-range. One thing that I also think doesn't get enough credit that he does is his passing. And I don't have the numbers pulled up right in front of me, but he was right around 5 assists per game when I was looking at them a couple of days ago before the Orlando game. So he's at minimum over 4 assists per game. And when you're used to Tyrese Haliburton and you're used to seeing double-digit assists and all that, maybe the 4s and the 5s don't jump out. But for a person at his position and a player at his position, the average power forward probably is somewhere between a 1 and a 2 assist per game rate, and he's more in the 4 to 5 category. I don't think he gets enough credit for that. But in a season so far, and in the last couple of seasons, at times you've seen the peaks and valleys. You remember last year the Pacers had an unbelievable record against some of the top teams, and then didn't always take care of business against some of the bottom teams. And maybe we're seeing a little bit of that play out so far this year. He's Mr. Consistency. The team hasn't had the consistency that they would like, in part, I think, because of the injuries, in part because Tyrese Haliburton is still trying to get back into prime form, and I do think that'll happen. But Siakam is Mr. Consistency, and I don't think that can be overstated enough either. Just having somebody like him who's going to get you 27 and 4, it seems like, on every single night. And the other thing I love about him is late in games, he's a bucket getter. You can just get him the ball, and he's always going to get you a good look. Shot's not always going to fall. Game winner's not always going to go in. But you're always pretty confident when he's going up that you've got a good chance. And so, I think he's a 2-time All-Star. I think he's shown in his career what he is. I doubt you're going to get a wildly different version of him, but exactly who he is I think, exactly what this Pacers team needs.
No, you're right about that. And 4.3 assists is his average right now for the season. And one thing I was going to say, a couple of things here, actually. I think the three-point shot, if it can kind of translate and become a weapon of his moving forward in his career, that's going to help him stay in the league a little bit longer, just because he is an older guy. But if he can be a threat from outside, it just opens up so much more of his game where he doesn't have to put so many, miles, I guess you could say, or so much wear and tear down low. banging and having such a more physical game. He can kind of play physical at times, but doesn't have to be strictly physical, which I think has been a lot of his game early on in his career, just that mid-range, low post kind of guy that has that great, turnaround jumper that just he hits it a lot. It's very, very good. It's not like you should get rid of that, but it's just nice to have another element of that game to be added. Now, I will ask you this because having Pascal with this young core does kind of feel similar to when the Pacers brought in David West with that group with Paul George, Lance Stevenson. I mean, they're totally different players, but they still do a lot of the same things. I mean, do you feel like Pascal Siakam is this Indiana Pacers era version of David West?
Yeah, I think the comparison's really good. And, I think back to that game one in Milwaukee. There had been so much pent-up energy around here. Pacers hadn't been to the playoffs in a while. Tyrese Haliburton had never been to the playoffs. The in-season tournament run was great, but that was a thing of a few months ago. This is the real deal. Going into that Milwaukee series, the Pacers, with Giannis being out, and at the time you didn't know they were going to be out the whole series, but the Pacers had kind of been the trendy pick around the analyst world, which is like never the case. The Pacers are never the trendy pick, but they were going into that Milwaukee series. There was a lot of pent-up energy and anticipation, and game one did not go well. And I'll never forget being in that locker room, or being in that press conference room, which it was a locker room, a makeshift locker room that had worked as the press conference room. And, there was just a general kind of unease and lack of confidence, maybe malaise kind of around after the Pacers had laid a little bit of a dud in game one. And I remember somebody asking him about that, and he just kind of shrugged it off and he said, Milwaukee's the home team. They're the higher seed. They were supposed to win game one. They did what they're supposed to do. Big deal. And it was almost like I don't know specifically if those exact comments permeated and changed the mindset, but I think it was a fantastic example of, look, I think David West was a little bit more naturally vocal. Like David West could go be a motivational speaker, I think, right now, and do a great job with that. And I don't know that comes quite as naturally to Siakam, but they do listen to him, and his words do go a long, long way. We saw the preseason before training camp session that he had down in Florida, him trying to be more of a leader. But I think back to that moment, and I think it was a massive one for the run the Pacers ended up having. It almost felt like he just kind of popped the balloon of tension and anxiety, and it was so true. It was 1 out of 7. Milwaukee did what they did. We know how the series went. The Pacers were terrific in game 2. They won in 6. So I think that comparison is very, very good. I think a lot of what David West provided, Pascal Siakam provided, including the consistency that we're talking about. I mean, West was as consistent of an on-court player as that era had, and Siakam is as consistent of an on-court player as this era has.
It's just fun to see those kind of parallels, right, with both eras, because you can kind of relate to it, right? A lot of Pacer fans were around for that. I think a lot of Pacer fans that are probably around our age really got into Indiana during that time. I know probably younger, people probably didn't see that as much, and this is kind of their new era of it. But David West was so important, right, to that franchise and to that team, and they wouldn't have been the team that they were without him. So, Paul was the star, Roy Hibbert was the secondary star, but there was David West. And you're kind of probably seeing that now with Tyrese. And then Pascal's probably the number 2 guy, right, for this team. But, Mathurin, the way he's playing, the way he's ascending, he could potentially become the number 2 guy while Pascal's still here under contract. So I just like those parallels. But looking forward to Friday night's game against Miami. I did mention Jimmy Butler will be out, but what have you seen from this Miami team early on with how they've played this season? Maybe that could give us a little bit of a preview. I don't know if you got to see them too much, but I do know they had a little bit of a blunder against the Pistons where Eric Spoelstra, channeled his inner Chris Webber.
Yeah, that was a 1.8 seconds I think they would like to forget. And I think what's so odd about it is that's just like if you were to line up the coaches in the franchises 1 through 30 who might have something like that happen. I think Miami's probably near the bottom just in terms of experience on the roster and at the head coach position. But look, stuff happens. Miami is maybe the team to me in the entire NBA that I look at, and when you say, how are they playing or what are you expecting? I mean, you talk about consistency. My expectation for them, it never really changes. They could be 1-10, or they could be 11-1. And I view them about the same. Now, Jimmy Butler out, of course, changes the dynamic dramatically. And the Pacers have been really banged up, but they've also played some teams that have been missing their stars and did not take advantage of that against Philadelphia. Did a better job of that in the Orlando home game. Now, another opportunity. I think that's how I would view that. But the Heat are perhaps as, they are in a position to weather the storm of losing a Jimmy Butler type player as well as anybody in the NBA. So I'm not saying the Pacers won't go out and win by 20 or that they definitely won't have a bad night. But when I think of Pacers and Heat over the years and even this current iteration of Miami, this current iteration of Indiana, it just kind of seems like with 6 minutes to go, this game's going to be within a possession or two. And how do the Pacers close? We've seen some great finishes. New York was terrific. Orlando at home got a little dicey, but they got it done at the end. And we've seen some games where they haven't finished so well. Philadelphia at home, Orlando recently, at Charlotte too. So I would be, to be honest, a little bit surprised if there was a clear favorite in the game with 6 minutes to go. I think that's just kind of who Miami is and also kind of who the Pacers are right now too. They're competitive in every game. They aren't blowing anybody out. Save the Charlotte game, they aren't really getting blown out. So this one has two competitive games written all over it, and who makes a play or two down the stretch, to me, probably decides how these next two go.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing with both teams right now. I think either way you look at it, you could see them winning or losing. I mean, Terry Rozier, I feel like he has been, a problem for the Pacers at times before, and he did not play good in Detroit. So a couple of days off, I think that's going to be good for him. I would expect him to have a good game. I think Bam always usually plays the Pacers pretty well in that matchup. Tyler Hero just went off for 40 points against the Pistons in that game, and so maybe he cools off a little bit. Kevin Love's returning, right? So this is an interesting game to me. I'm really hoping the Pacers and the fans kind of, the Pacer fans really make the difference in this game, right? Just that 6-man based on the crowd, just uplifting this team. I think the new court is going to be awesome for fans to get a look at. The Boom Baby navy and gold, it looks a little bit better to me than the bright aqua teal color we saw last year. I didn't mind it as much as people did. It was a little weird seeing it on TV, but it was so like bright in your face. This one, it feels like it's paying a little bit more homage to who the Indiana Pacers really are. And of course, Slick Leonard with the Boom Baby. But exciting game ahead of us. But we're going to kind of close things out here just because I don't usually get you on here enough to talk about the Fever. But the Indiana Fever have been one of the biggest talking points all summer long. Caitlyn Clark, that is one of the greatest things that ever happened to the sport of basketball, really, just because of how much attention she draws, especially women's basketball. But a lot of changes going on. Stephanie White brought in as the head coach. You got your big three, I guess you could say, with the Fever. And free agency coming up, Kelly Krauskopf back in control. What is going on here with the Fever? There's just a lot of buzz going on with Indiana right now.
It just kind of feels like you're watching the MLB's home run derby when a player gets really hot. It just feels like home run after home run after home run after home run. And that's after what felt like 5 years or so of strikeouts. Ooh. I mean, it was a really tough stretch for a long time. The Fever got horrible lottery luck. They, had a few seasons where they frankly weren't even close to contending. And then all of a sudden they finally get some lottery luck. It's the Aliyah Boston draft. And I'll never forget where I was. I was at Ale Emporium for the Fever's official draft party. And that was the night that everything changed. And I'm talking a year before Caitlyn Clark, which also was a night where everything changed. But that was where the franchise began the 180. Aliyah Boston, unanimous rookie of the year, a future Hall of Famer. That's when the Fever really started this climb. And then Caitlyn Clark goes without saying, I don't need to go back and recount all of the terrific memories. Everybody saw them, everything she did year one, the Fieldhouse being sold out nearly every single night. Our TV ratings were through the roof. I mean, it was just such a spectacular experience. I feel so fortunate to get to play a fairly small role in all of it. And then you talk about bringing Kelly Krauskopf back, who's been so influential in building this iteration of this Pacers team. And she had, I think, one of the all-time ingenious front office decisions in the history of sports when she drafted Tamika Catchings on a torn ACL, knowing she wasn't going to be able to play in that first season. The pressure to make that decision must have been immense with an expansion franchise selecting a player that they couldn't even use right away. But she was the architect of that championship team that went to the finals 3 times. To have her back, and I mean, come on, Steph White. I mean, her roots are as deep in basketball in this state as arguably anybody. Miss Basketball, national champion at Purdue, Fever player, Fever assistant, Fever head coach, helped bring the Fever to a championship appearance, a win away from a championship. And after winning Coach of the Year a couple years ago at Connecticut, she's back with the franchise. Home run, home run, home run, home run. And now, where do they build? A lot like the Pacers going into this last Fever season. Now, unlike the Pacers, the spotlight was unlike anything a WNBA team had ever seen, but the expectations weren't incredibly high. They were coming off a 13-win season. Expectations for the Fever are going to rise immensely starting like a few weeks ago, a couple months ago, after they were eliminated in the playoffs, to be honest. And so that'll be the next intriguing thing. How does Kelly, Amber Cox, who was brought in as general manager, Lynn Dunn, who is still an advisor, I mean, that's a powerhouse of people in the front office who are intelligent, know what they're doing, and have a ton of experience in WNBA basketball. So how do they start to fill out this roster? I think we saw that depth was not where it needed to be, albeit fair. This team is far from a finished product, but depth was not where it needed to be last year. So it's been a massive offseason in terms of the coaching and the front office. We'll see once we get to free agency and the potential trade period if they're able to continue having that level of success and rounding out the type of team that I think if this offseason goes well, I don't think it's out of the realm of possibility to say that this could be a Fever team that's perhaps contending for a championship. Please don't get me wrong. They're not going to be the favorites. What we saw New York do was incredible. Vegas has been terrific. But you're talking about a team that's capable of competing with those type of teams if everything continues to go well.
Is the number one priority to bring Kelsey Mitchell back?
Yeah, I would have to think so. You know, and there's a few ways that you can do that. You know, in the WNBA, the WNBA in a lot of ways parallels the NBA in terms of you know, how contracts work and how the draft works. It's different when you have 12 teams, and the salary cap, of course, is not the same. But a lot of the structure is similar. One major difference is the core, which is essentially like the NFL's franchise tag. So, look, Kelsey had an unbelievable season. I don't want to speak for her, but she had an unbelievable season because she's an unbelievable player, and she got to play next to an unbelievable player. And I think she knows that. So I don't know. I have no inside information, but I absolutely think it's the number one priority. And I think Kelsey understands what this team was able to accomplish, what she was able to accomplish, and what they can accomplish in the future. You know, she was here for all those tough times.
Yeah.
She rode through all of them, and she is somebody that I feel as good for it as anybody, because she deserves to have a season like last year where she got recognition for what she accomplished. And even though they didn't win a playoff game, she got to go to the playoffs for the first time. And hopefully it's just the beginning of a lot more success for Mitchell here in Indiana.
Yeah, and I hate to draw parallels back to the Pacers with the Paul George era, but she probably feels like the Danny Granger of this Fever team, right? Because she was there for all these years. You get Aliyah Boston. I don't know if that's really Roy Hibbert or not, but you know, Caitlyn Clark is essential to Paul George, right? Like that's kind of like the comparison you'd make there for these two teams. And she was awesome last year. They had some really great moments. I was just kind of curious about how they would view bringing her back, just because Stephanie White's such a defensive-minded coach. You know, your defense is probably not going to be as strong with Mitchell and Clark together, but they could get pieces around them that maybe would bolster the defense. Now, I don't want to put you on the spot, and so if you don't want to talk too much about this, I mean, please feel free to deflect it. But NaLyssa Smith, I thought it was very interesting last year, just how she kind of got pulled from the starting rotation in game 2 against the Sun, didn't play very much. And then she was very vocal about it on social media, just kind of her ups and downs this year, her frustration. Do you envision a future with her, with the Fever? Or if she does come back, how can she be utilized differently with Stephanie White compared to Christy Sides?
Look, I certainly think there's a world where NaLyssa Smith works within the framework of what the Fever has. She's a talented player. And I think the biggest challenge last season was not so much her talent or her motivation or anything like that. I think some of that maybe at times got unfairly characterized or miscast. I think it's just her skill set and what makes her tick and be at her best. Well, it changed dramatically from her first 2 years in terms of how she fit in with all of this. And I think she was at times a little bit on the outside looking in, just in terms of, what was working for the Fever. So I think, look, I don't know what's going to happen in the future of NaLyssa Smith. I think there are, you've got the Help the Helper book back there. I was actually thinking about of one of Kevin Pritchard's analogies, which a year and a half or so ago, almost 2 years ago now, he talked about the Pacers being a ship and having a wide array of areas that the ship could go over the next couple of years. And that's kind of how I view NaLyssa Smith's future. She's undoubtedly talented. She was the #2 pick in the draft.
Mhm.
I think, it's possible that this coaching change and front office change is a breath of fresh air for her. So I'll be interested to see how that looks. I do think for her to have some success and for her to fit in long term and have success, I think it might involve not necessarily her game changing or what makes her play well change, but she, I think, has to find a way, and perhaps the Fever have to find a way to mesh those skill sets a little better. So we'll see. I have no idea what's going to happen there, but I do think one thing you touched on is absolutely accurate, which is Stephanie White's a defensive-minded head coach. And so the backcourt of Caitlyn Clark and Kelsey Mitchell is maybe never going to be that type of backcourt that just locks you up and shuts you down. But they are so good offensively that there's a lot to work with because of all of their benefit on offense. I think if that is going to be your 1 and 2 of the future, everybody else has to be a really good defender. And look, Lexi Hull is certainly that. Aliyah Boston's that. So I think whoever plays that starting power forward position, NaLyssa or somebody else, is going to have to really be maybe not a lockdown defender, but a positive defender, because that is something that Stephanie White's going to value. And I'll tell you this, Caitlyn and Kelsey, assuming Kelsey is back, are both going to get better defensively because Stephanie White. She's that good of a coach that you will see, I have no doubt, improvement for both of those two players on the defensive end of the floor. Some of it personal growth, and some of it just her schemes and her coaching and her mindset.
Yeah, it's a great point. I mean, I was going to say schematically, I think Stephanie White could probably be a little bit more innovative with how she kind of, runs her defense with Caitlyn. And I think Caitlyn Clark, I mean, she's still pretty young, right? A rookie, came in last year, and I think she's only going to get better. The way she handled everything that was thrown at her so well this year. I mean, the amount of pressure she had on her, and to be able to kind of handle every question that was asked. She answered everything very authentically and knew what to say and what not to say. I mean, that's a lot to put on somebody, and I think she's got the right personality to handle it. And then, I feel like Aliyah Boston continues to just kind of be under the radar a little bit because Caitlyn Clark's shine is so bright. But Aliyah Boston's a heck of a player. I was just so impressed with her in the playoffs, and I really thought she was starting to show why she really is that #2 option. Like, it's not just this is Caitlyn Clark's team. Like, no, this isn't, I hate to say it, like this ABC squared team, right? Because you've got Aliyah Boston, Caitlyn Clark, their initials together make that little acronym there. But I just feel like those two together are going to be dynamic for a long time. And I think with Stephanie White, they are in great hands. And so I'm pretty much repeating everything you said, but I'm excited. And I would say this, like, I've not been the biggest basketball watcher of the WNBA because it's my time to kind of get away from basketball because the Pacers season's so long. But I honestly, every time they were playing, I wanted to tune in because the games were so good, and this team is so fun to watch, and I think they're just going to continue to get better.
The product in the WNBA, I've had the good fortune of doing this for 10 seasons. And I took over in part for Chris in 2017 and then in full for Chris in 2018. The product in the WNBA has been really good for a long time. I think in a lot of ways it needed somebody to do exactly what Caitlyn Clark has done, which is, look, she has a massive following, and for great reason. She's maybe the most entertaining women's basketball player. It depends on your definition, that many have ever seen. But at the same time, she's bringing eyeballs into the product that maybe previously weren't going to come to the product, but then do, and then they go, okay, this is awesome. I love watching Caitlyn and this team, but I also love watching Breanna Stewart and Asia Wilson and Nafisa Collier and Alyssa Thomas. And I firmly believe, I believe it as ardently as any sports take that I could have is Caitlyn Clark not only is tremendous for this league because of the viewership that she's bringing in, for her on the court play, for her, and you touched on that a moment ago, and I'm glad you did. I don't think I've ever seen, at least in my orbit, in Pacers sports entertainment orbit, and then also dealing with other opposing players, a player as well-spoken and as genuine as her. She gets thrown landmines for questions left and right, and she never verbally misspoke one time as a 22-year-old, and to me, that's almost more impressive than anything she did on the floor.
Yeah.
But I don't mean to sidetrack. All of those are great, but also the spotlight that she's going to provide the rest of this league. So many players that deserved to have a bigger audience that maybe didn't for whatever reason. She's going to help those players attain what, in my opinion, they've long deserved too. So the many facets that Caitlyn Clark and her spotlight bring in, they're unbelievable for this franchise. They're unbelievable for this city, this state, any fan of basketball anywhere near here. But they're great for the entire league, and they're terrific for the sport. And the other thing that just makes me so excited is you watch women's college basketball right now, and there are numerous stars that are, I think, not as popular as Caitlyn, but as popular as we've seen a non-Caitlyn Clark division star too. I mean, Paige Beckers and Juju Watkins and Hannah Dalgo. I mean, this is going to keep coming. You're going to keep getting waves of players with just this significant spotlight coming in like we haven't seen before. And I could sit here and share my excitement for the Fever and as you can tell, for the WNBA long after you want me to be quiet on this podcast. But it's been a terrific thing to experience. How fortunate are we to have this happen right here in our city and with this franchise?
Hey, I said it before. It was my fault for not getting you on here enough to talk about the Fever, and it was my fault for not covering the Fever enough throughout the season. So I'm going to plan on trying to work on adjusting that moving forward, getting a little bit more Fever coverage on Setting the Pace. I know we're a Pacers podcast, but I do want to cover the Fever a little bit more. So as we close things out here, just two things. I'm looking at your X profile here, and I'm going back to that story of when you had to fill in for Chris Denari because he had kidney stones in New York. This is your header here with your photo with you and Quinn Buckner in Madison Square Garden. I just got to ask you, it says you're the fill-in radio TV play-by-play guy for the Pacers here. So what was that moment like when it's kind of like, hey, Pat, we need you to come in and fill in for Chris. He's got kidney stones, and you're doing it in Madison Square Garden of all places.
That story itself could take up this entire podcast because it's just it's the most insane day of my life. I was here in Indianapolis in sweatpants at our radio studio hosting Pacers Weekly on a Saturday morning when I got a call from my boss, Jamie Burns, and he said, hey, Chris is headed to the hospital. He's going to be okay. They think it might be kidney stones. He's not going to be calling the game tonight. We're trying to get you a flight out here, and we're going to need you to call Pacers Knicks. I woke up that morning, didn't shower, went to the radio studio, and then like 30 minutes later found out I was going to be headed to Madison Square Garden. And he said, get out of the show, do whatever you do. Pacers Weekly is not the most important thing right now, and get to the airport. But I hadn't even showered yet, so I had to sprint home. I didn't want to tell him that because I didn't want to make him more nervous. I had to sprint home, shower. I prepped on the plane. Of all of the places to call a road game, Madison Square Garden, I mean, come on, are you kidding me? I mean, if it weren't for Chris suffering a medical ailment, it would be a dream story. That's kind of the part of the whole thing. But fortunately, our group then and so a couple of these people have Max Line One, our producer, is no longer with the Pacers. But that our group is so tightly knit, and I work so much with them, even in my current role. I have dinner with them before every game. So it was really just jumping in and going. And, Quinn's easy to work with. Jeremiah's great. Jamie's terrific. Our producers that we've had have been great. So I just slid in there and got so fortunate that the game was amazing. The Pacers won on a walk-off missed free throw by Julius Randle. They were down 2, foul with like a second left, hit the first, missed the second. So it was a broadcaster's dream. You just call what's right in front of you on the floor at Madison Square Garden. Clyde Frazier was like 6 feet to my left. It was a few years ago now, but as you can see, it still brings back all these fantastic memories. I never would wish Chris is my mentor. I'm so close to him. I would never wish any ill on Chris, but that day was awesome.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think Chris is probably happy for you that you got that moment, despite everything he had to go through. I know he didn't want to break his streak of, games that he had telecasted in a row, right? Because Chris is very prideful in that. That's a great thing. I love Chris, right? The detail he puts into the amount of, prep that he puts into. I mean, it's just incredible. Like his sheets, he'll show them to you. I mean, I don't even know how he can figure out where everything's at because he's got so much information on there. But it's great to see that. But I will say the last thing here, I'm not trying to rat you out or anything, but you might want to update your information here on your profile because you still got Bally Sports on there. Just gonna throw that out there.
Good call. That's a good call.
Yeah, just trying to help you out.
We'll make sure to update that. Thank you.
Yeah. So, I mean, Chris has yet to mess up and call it Bally Sports. So I'm proud of him for that. And he's let me know that he hasn't messed up yet. So, the announcer jinx has not happened to Chris. It has happened to our Pacers who are shooting free throws, but that's okay. We'll let it slide. But Pat, a lot of fun, man. I really appreciate you coming on. I definitely took you down paths that you probably weren't expecting. And we went probably longer than I told you we'd go too. So, but great to cover both the Pacers and the Fever on this one. And hopefully we can do it again soon.
Thanks for having me. My light at times was going a little haywire, and I was trying to work on it. So if there's some,
I didn't notice anything. I saw you fidgeting with something, but I wasn't sure what it was.
Well, hopefully, it's not showing as much in the video as it's looking in my preview. But if fans are watching this and they're going, "Geez, are you having a power outage or something?" I've been using this light for a long time and never had any issues, but unfortunately. Yeah. I'm for a new one. But hey, appreciate you having me on, man. It was great to talk Pacers, great to talk Fever, and anytime you want to talk again, you've got my number. Hit me up. All
right, Pat, we'll do. And where can people find you at on social before I let you go?
Yeah, well, I mean, maybe you should tell them because I don't even know how to do my social apparently. But I am I'm at Pat Boylan Pacers on Twitter. I refuse to call it X. That's really where I share the vast majority of professional work, whether it's on the Pacers side or on the Fever side. So would love to have you as a follower and appreciate everybody who's been along for the ride with Pacers and Fever. And I know there's a lot of people like you, Alex, who for the first time this past year. And it's so great to have, these the people that are diehard fans of the Pacers and listen to your podcast and our podcast and followers on Twitter that you interact with. I mean, they begin to feel like part of your community. And then so when the WNBA season hits, it's a different community, but it's been cool to see those kind of merge together. Yes. And so many people that have been following from October through April or May or whatever it is, be along for the ride in May, June, July, and August too. So if you're one of the 2 or 3 people under a rock that missed Caitlyn Clark's rookie season, we would love to have you once things come back around in May. But obviously, hopefully, plenty of exciting stuff to talk about on the Pacers side before we get there too.
He is a Twitter guy. He did not have a Blue Sky account to promote yet, but hey.
I don't, but you know what? Yesterday I made one. So I can lock my account in there. So if that migration ends up happening, I'm not going to have to be like P Boylan 9326847. Got the name locked in. I'm prepared if the change happens.
Yeah, I went ahead and made my account, I think, earlier this week. So Blue Sky, I've got some followers already over there. So thank you, everybody, for following me over there. But I'm still going to be on Twitter mostly just because it feels natural. I still like the way it looks a little bit better. But, Blue Sky might become the new thing. You never know. So, Pat, I appreciate you, man. I'll probably see you at the game tomorrow. So hope you have a great rest of your night. And Pacer fans, let's get excited because the Pacers are back in action against the Miami Heat. First NBA Cup game. Hopefully they can get a W and the Pacers can get back on that path to Las Vegas. Pat, thanks again.
Of course, Alex. Thanks for having me.